I want to welcome everybody today to the Faith Inclusion Network's webinar with Bill Gaventa. and we're just so pleased to have Bill with us today to talk about some planning strategies and how our Bible and how some principles from the Bible can help us in this. So as we start here, my name is Tom Jones. I'm the executive director of the Faith Inclusion Network, and we help churches and other faith communities include people with disabilities and can offer some training and resources and connect and networking opportunities that can really help churches and faith communities along the way in their inclusive planning. Um, we have a good group of people with us today, and so uh, one of the things we wanted to kind of do is have everybody introduce each other, and and so
Can we see each other for a bit?
we won't be able to because it's a webinar.
Oh, webinar. Okay.
Uh, oh, sorry about that. Um, but anyway, the format today is that Bill will give a presentation, and then at the end we will have time for questions and answers. So if you will put your questions and answers either in the QA or in the chat, and Rebecca Wolf will gather those, and then also go ahead and we can get those answered at the end of Bill's presentation. I see some people are introducing themselves in the chat. Please go ahead and do that. Your name and where you're from, and also what capacity that you're serving in. So that way Bill can kind of get an idea of who his audience is, and we can too, and uh, make it a little bit more interactive and personal. So please continue to uh, introduce yourself and put your names in the chat. Bill Gaventa, we could spend probably 30 minutes talking about all that he's done in the field of faith and disability. But he started out as a Southern Baptist missionary kid, and but one of his missions was to really minister with people with disabilities and find a place for them in our churches and faith communities. Bill has served two full-time ministries as a chaplain in two different institutions for people with disabilities. He was For 20 years, he was the director of community and congregational supports for the Elizabeth M. Boggs Center in New Jersey. And it's a statewide agency that provided training, research, technical assistance, and dissemination of key information with the goal of really enhancing some community-based supports and services for people with disabilities and their families. He also ran a CPE program and supervised field education students and worked with seminaries in the area and faith communities across the state. Bill has been an advocate and a resource to help faith communities be more inclusive of people with disabilities and their families. Bill is the founder of the Institute on Theology and Disability. He's author of Disability and Spirituality, and recently almost completed a book on preaching disability. Bill has been a mentor to myself and many others in this field, and a friend. And I'm really glad to welcome Bill to this webinar, and I think we'll gain a whole lot of insight and a whole lot from his thoughts and expertise and experience. So, Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you for that too long introduction. But it's really good to be here. It's good to see some of the names coming through, both the people that I've known and worked with in the past, and new people who are new to me. It's always a delight to meet new people and hear about what people are doing in this arena. It's it's I think people come at it from so many different directions, and we'll talk about that some as we go through here. Uh, uh, let's see. You can't see my webinar chat thing, can you, on the screen? No, okay, because I had it up to see the names, but I didn't want to do that different. So, biblically infused planning strategies in disability ministry. My work as a clergyman, I grew up a Southern Baptist missionary kid. A lot of good Bible education in that way. Ordained American Baptist, and uh, my work has been both on the faith side of inclusion with faith communities and congregations and seminary students and seminaries, and also on the more secular side of working with agencies, advocacy groups, service providers, policymakers, and others, or really trying to help both sides, both worlds talk to each other, and to learn from each other about the importance of faith communities as sources of support and as places where people with disabilities can contribute gifts and much more to their own life as disciples or as faithful people, whatever their faith background. And a number of years ago, I was doing a lot of work in community building. That's what we were doing in at the Bog Center, New Jersey. And and as I was reflecting on a number of things about things that I've learned in community building, watching along with churches and then watching and walking along with other groups who are working on community inclusion, some of the kind of key themes that I was hearing and learning about uh, kind of sort of it's one of those times I hope some of you have the same time where some things suddenly come together and you say, "Oh, let me just write some of this down," and uh, and that's what I did, and I've used it in a variety of ways. So I didn't get to these biblically infused planning strategies by going to the Bible and looking for planning strategies around uh, around disability or working with people with disabilities. I've got to this by bringing my background and experience as a pastor and as a chaplain and working in policy and program development, along with areas of community inclusion and more, and then reflecting on those in the kind of from a biblical perspective and my perspective of faith and how they lined up with, I think, some key themes that are also in the Bible. So let me start uh, with let me start with the first. This is not going to be a webinar about how to start a ministry. It's There are so many resources out there these days. There's so many different contexts in which ministries are happening, inclusive ministries or faith supports. There are books out there like Sandra Peoples' new book on accessible church. There are networks like Key Ministry, the Institute on Theology and Disability, the Faith Inclusion Network. There are tons of articles now, webinars, people supporting webinars in a variety of, of places. Oops. Resource networks, individual consultants who are working in this area, and institutes and centers like the relatively new one at Baylor, and the work they're doing and the great work on terms of actually getting some research, numbers and qualitative research um, to to give us a more knowledgeable foundation for what we've experienced and what we've known in our own work with families and with people with disabilities and their families. So there are lots of resources out there about how to do something and what to do. What I'm trying to talk today about is kind of what is the kind of spirit you bring into this process in terms of working on inclusion and faith communities. What are some spirit and principles that you would bring into that kind of things to keep in mind as you walk along in this journey with that? So the first one, I also want to say that I've borrowed some things from person-centered planning as well. I don't know how much of you know about person-centered planning, but if you don't know about the path process, um, the path process is one of the individual person-centered planning processes that can be used to help develop a support plan for an individual, but it can also be used by an organization to figure out what direction it wants to go and kind of to develop its own kind of strategic plan. And one of the things that I love about the path process is that it is it starts off with ideals and values. They call it the North Star. What's the kind of dream you have? What's the hope? And we of the biblical faith traditions would have clear ways to answer that kind of hope of what we feel like we're called to and hope that faith communities can do. So it starts with that rather than just starting necessarily with the needs or the problems that we see. And then it goes into secondly says, what say a year from now, see step two, what a year from now, what kinds of things could we have maybe accomplished that would help us see ourselves moving towards that North Star? I mean, you may never get to the North Star itself. I may want to be a shortstop for the New York Yankees, but I'm never going to do that. But that can still be a dream that motivates me or whatever. But what would that look like? A vision for a possible future not too long from now. And then you create that kind of vision and some steps. And then part of this process is going back to where you are now, where we are now, either as an organization or with an individual. And who are we going to invite to work along with us in this? Uh, who are we going to enroll in this vision and planning process and work process? And the fifth step, which I think is so often overlooked in a lot of planning and committee works and things we do, is what's going to keep us strong in the midst of this. And one of the things you'll hear me talk about in a little bit is the importance of taking time to reflect upon our sense of call, what we're learning, maybe those kind of aha moments, the revelations and things that we're discovering as we move along that help to rekindle the spirit and keep us strong. And then in this planning process, you go from that five to then, all right, where would we like to be in maybe 6 months? And then seven is kind of like, where would we like to be in a month? And you end up with the last step, which is, all right, what are we going to do this next week? What are the steps we're going to take this next week? So the whole idea about person-centered planning, whether the path process or others, is you're looking at people's dreams and their gifts and their strengths, and that can be for an individual, but it can also be for a congregation. You're working from a strengths-based, a capacity-based approach, rather than from a deficit kind of perspective about or if, rather than from a deficit perspective. So first, so I hope that any kind of mission that you have set up for your own organization, your own work, is that mission is set within the mission and the vision of your congregation or faith community. And so that what you're doing in these kinds of ministries is make it see that that's seen as a natural outgrowth of what a congregation or faith community already thinks it is or hopes to be. I think so often when we try to think about starting inclusive ministries of one kind or another, sometimes it feels like an add-on to a church, or something that maybe is separate from the rest of the church. And that's why I think it's really important at the very beginning to say, all right, who do we think we are already as a church? And what are our values? And who do we want to be? And then being able to articulate how beginning to be more intentional about ministries with people with disabilities and their families is an outgrowth of that, not a not a not necessarily a change in direction for a congregation or a faith community. It's an outgrowth of that naturally. So the first step, I think, that the concrete thing is who's around the table. who's around the table when you're making the planning. And there are all kinds of course, biblical images of this, like Luke 14, in terms of the messianic banquet, or who are you talking to? Who are included? Who's included in terms of what you're wanting to do? And these days, the phrase "nothing about me without me." I think so oftentimes I've heard of ministries in the past being planned for people or to people without those people being involved from the very beginning in different way, in a variety of ways. So developing, if you're hoping to enlist somebody's support in the future for what you're hoping to do as a task force or a congregation, well, then enlist them as soon as you can. Get their perspectives early on. And their ideas, because the more people are able to participate in sharing their ideas, as you know, then the more sense of ownership they might have as you move along and begin to develop action plans. So the first kind of thing is who's around the table, and our table in faith communities hopefully is broad enough to be welcoming for every single kind of person with whom we want to be part of God's people and part of that congregation. The second one was be careful with language. Who do you say that I am? Uh, that's the kind of question of God to Moses, who do you say that I am? Or Moses asking God, I am who I am. And people asking Jesus, Jesus asking the disciples, who do you say that I am? It's being careful with the words and language so that we're moving out of the realm of labels and moving towards talking about people and individuals. So being careful with words and language, avoiding the overuse of professional lingo. Uh, if you've worked with pastors and congregations, that to introduce them into the world of disabilities, if that's the world that you work in, and especially in human services, they can be, and families can be immediately overwhelmed by the kinds of language that's used and the acronyms that are used for different kinds of agencies and different kinds of policy issues. Remember names. Remember names. The names are so important, and I it still amazes me even these days when I'll meet somebody who says, "Oh, yeah, I'm a parent. I'm a mother or a dad of a son or daughter with a disability," and simply saying, and they sort of expect the conversation to go on. And if you just take the time to say, "Well, what's their name?" And tell me about that, that makes a difference to people. Um, and if we're unsure about how we want to refer to disabilities, ask the people involved about their preferences. There are a lot of different ways that people uh, 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 think about their own conditions. There's person first language that there are some people with some kinds of disabilities who don't like person-centered language because they want to claim their disability as part of their identity, just like many people who've been undervalued in the past take that label of undervaluing and turn it around and make it something positive. You can think about that with people who are deaf or people who are autistic or who say, I am autistic. I remember one of my fun story that I went to one of my early conferences on autism in New York was sponsored by Fordham, and there was a young woman, uh, autistic woman on the panel, and she said, I'm autistic. Just call me autistic. Uh, I'm not a person with autism, she says to this Catholic audience. She said, you don't call yourselves persons with Catholicism. You're Catholic. So be sensitive, and we ask about preferences. And then as you're thinking about your endeavor, maybe don't try to name it all of a sudden, but start working on it and then begin to think about um, what kinds of names that you might want if you're starting an initiative or a program. Uh, you don't need to start a program per se to get started in this. Small churches don't start programs usually. Bigger churches often do. That's the way they begin new things. It really depends upon context. But so think about, though, if it's you need initiative and you need things. Okay, we're going to work on these things which may be new. Think about biblical or faith metaphors for the names of that fit into your congregation's mission and that fit into your understanding of who people are. Uh, I think those biblical names or faith metaphors, I think, work better often than some other names that are specifically about disability. So being careful with our language and making sure it's respectful and that we see each person as someone with dignity and value and the ways to do that. The third is reverse the questions. When somebody asks a question to us about how can we do this with a person, how can we do this for that kid with autism or that autistic kid? Uh, then part of our response should be, as we think about things, is, well, how do we do it with everybody else? How do we do it with everybody else? And it's not to be careful about making a person who may be different because of a label or a behavior or has some kind of sense of difference attached to them, rather than say, what kinds of special skills or whatever do we need to do uh, something with that person or to be present to them and include them in whatever. The issues are, how do you welcome anybody else? How do we include any other person at that age range? What do we do usually with other people? I mean, this comes partly out of hearing families say to me over the years, I don't want our church to necessarily do anything special. I just want them to be able to make a commitment to offering to us what they offer to every other family. And that's what we would most value is being included in what's there and kind of the typical life of the congregation. So the John 3 passage, of course, is one of the ways in which that reversal happens in the Bible when the disciples ask Jesus, why is this man born blind? His fault or his parents' fault, which is, of course, the response that lots of people in faith communities have these days if they have not had experience with people with disabilities is why are they disabled? And perhaps whose fault is it? And Jesus, of course, reverses that by saying it's not about anybody's sin. It's not about anybody's fault, but it's about the opportunity we have right now so that the works of God might be made manifest in the way that it's about this opportunity here for us to respond where Jesus responds in a way that I could not respond, but it's that opportunity right now for us to respond and to show the grace and the love of God. In fact, he goes on in that passage to say, for the night's coming, we have much work to do. It's our responsibility, in a sense, to respond. It's not my responsibility to be a miracle worker, but it's my responsibility to respond and ours to respond. And as you know, in the Bible, the Bible is full of reversals, where you think about people who saying it's the poor and the weak who understand, the foolish who understand. In weakness, there's power and strength. The people who think they can see and understand really are the ones who are blind and deaf. You know, it's full of reversals throughout the Bible and unexpected ways and of change and thinking that one thing's going to happen, but something else completely different happens from a different direction. So I think reversing the questions and making sure the questions are inclusive of everybody that we're asking that disability may raise for us is important as we're talking with people and beginning to think about beginning to go along with what we do. And I used for a long time to call this fourth strategy simply reversing the answers, but I found out it's got a name to that. I mean, as I've gone along and I've gotten older, I've been more and more aware that the kinds of things that people have discovered in terms of ways to support people with disabilities and different kinds of disabilities turn out to be things that are helpful to a whole lot of other people. So the things we discover, um, the answers that we find to some of those questions or the strategies or tactics or resources we use may turn out to be useful to a whole lot of other people in a variety of different ways. And it's called the curb cut effect, which comes out of a famous study in Minnesota where they um, did curb cuts back after the Rehab Act passed in the 70s, I think, and then asked everybody on campus why they did it. They did it because if they wanted to receive federal funds, they had to do things to make things more accessible. But it was the people who used strollers and families said you did it for us, and the people who rode bikes said you did it for us, and the delivery people, folks serving the vending machines in the dorms and elsewhere said you did it for us. And so there, not just in terms of physical accessibility, there are more and more things coming out of the world of disability um, that have been useful to lots of people. A lot of us use tools, kitchen tools that were developed out of rehabilitation programs with better grasp and better grips and ways of doing things that came out of working with people with disabilities that all of us use. There are things, universal design in architecture. It becomes then saying, how do we design this in from the beginning so anybody can come? Positive behavior supports, which is a way of trying to help shift a child or an adult into a different kind of behavior to help them get what they want and desire, but to do it positively. That kind of strategy and technique in started off working with kids with emotional problems and behavioral problems, but like in places like New Jersey where I was, they had a whole team at the Bog Center teaching positive behavior supports to teachers of every kids in all the schools. It was not just about the kids uh, had uh, who had psychiatric issues or emotional problems, but how do you support discipline and how do you help build discipline in a positive way? Universal design for learning. Some people are tactile learners, visual learners, listening learners, reading learners. Again, that gets broader. Multi-sensory worship strategies for a long time now is we people have worked with people with have different kinds of sensory disabilities and to utilize then or you push to develop other sensory strategies to help communicate some aspect of worship or prayer or understanding. Those multi-sensory strategies where people use more than the senses of listening and hearing and seeing uh, get people involved in deeper ways in worship services, and other people can really appreciate that as well. Getting people moving, helping people. Like there's a favorite book of mine called 21 Ways of Postures for Prayer. You know, most of us grow up thinking there's one or two ways to do that, but they're around the world, there are at least 20, if not more, postures that people can use their bodies in prayer. Uh, Multi-sensory worship strategies. And then person-centered planning, again, is one of the strategies that's developed out of working with people with disabilities, but now people in healthcare and in hospitals and all kinds of other settings are using person-centered planning that it's named that way because it's the focus is on the person, not on the professional or the system making the diagnosis or making the plan. The person-centered plan is to involve the person and his or her immediate others from the very get-go, to involve what they want, what they dream, um, and what their hopes are, as well as what their needs are. And that can happen, that can be used strategically in a congregation who was thinking about uh, community care for any person who's got some needs within a congregation, as well as the model of circles of support, which is a strategy that again came out of the disability world, which is about organizing a committee or a group of people around an individual or family so that it's not just one person or two people saying we'll be supports to those people. There'll be a group of people that work with each other and support each other as they support that person. So there are strategies and things that have come out of the world of disability. I think that that then end up being applicable to lots of other people. And I think they're biblical ways of phrasing the same thing. The Beatitudes phrase some things, same things, the things that people think, oh, it's a way of reversing the kind of people who understand or those who are blessed and whatever, but rever being willing to see the answers from an unexpected place and an unexpected source, or from a person on the margin that then applies to the life at the center of the world of faith, not just to people who might be defined as being on the margins. Um, Fifth, um, sorry. Build a Joshua, this goes back to a circle of support again, our circle of support, a Joshua committee. The first circle of support um, that was developed and written about was one for Judith Snow, who was a friend of Jack Pierpoint and Marcia Forrest in Toronto. We have a person on our call from Toronto, Bob, Robert, welcome. And they worked along also at the beginning with Pat Mackin, who was a Catholic priest. And some of the very first inclusive education was in the Catholic Archdiocese of Toronto. People often don't know that history. But Judith Snow she spoke a couple of times at the Institute. Her tapes, plenary talks are just incredible. You can look them up online. But she was in a person with physical handicap, disabilities, was in a rehab hospital, desperately wanted to get out, but could not get out through the normal processes. There were no places who would provide supports, no strategies to do that. There were no resources that seemed to want to help her to get to the community, fulfill her dreams, how to help her get out of the hospital, a la the wilderness, into the promised land. And so she developed this first circle of support that included Jack and Marcia and some others, who then became the group of people who worked with her and worked with the systems and advocated and knocked on doors and asked why not and helped things to develop. So she indeed did get out and led a very productive life outside of a hospital setting. Goes back to the Joshua Committee. That wilderness is there. Send a group of people with Joshua. Send a group of people to help look at that land and see how we can get there and how we can help get there. And if you remember, then the Bible, that group of people, those group of spies came out, and Joshua and some of them said, "It's ready, we can go." But others said, "It's too dangerous. Those people look like giants and whatever." But it was that group of people with Joshua and others who then were the ones who were able to lead the people of Israel um, from the wilderness into the promised land, a kind of circle of support um, uh, for that. So if you've worked with people with intellectual disabilities, you're maybe familiar with relationship circles, which is a way of putting a person at the center of a number of circles and then see who are the people closest to them, and then who are the people that they know, maybe from school or clubs or teachers in different ways, and then who are the who are the professionals who work with them, maybe out on the perimeter. And one of the things we know for many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is that may have many people in the outer two circles of this diagram on this page, and not many people in the middle, in the close one or the one next to it. So the use of a circle of support for an individual, or particularly maybe a really tough kid or family or somebody in the congregation, um, can be a really effective strategy so that, again, people feel like they're supported one another. There's a little movie video called Believing, Belonging, Becoming that's available online. That's about 4 circles of support in 4 congregational settings. And if you want me to, I can send you the link if you send me an email afterwards. But think about circles of support. You may not be able to build a circle of support for everybody, but not everybody would need one. But it's a kind of way of building the number of connections and relationships that then can turn into friendships and real supports in different ways. Develop a Jericho strategy. Um, what I mean by that, of course, is the power of persistent celebration. The story in the Old Testament is of the people of Israel are called to march around the city, parading with music, with flags, with banners, with religious objects, uh, just something that does not look intimidating at all. It looks kind of crazy, in fact, for probably for the people inside who think that they are there to conquer them. And I'm not making any claims about what actually happens in that story. It just strikes me that one of that they were called to do this kind of celebration on the outside, and the walls fell down. Uh, what it says to me out of my own experience in terms of working with people is that if we come on in an attack kind of form and guilt kind of form, walls are going to go up. If you make people afraid, walls are going to go up. If it's too much, too fast. But if there's a kind of sense of persistent celebration, of positive vision, hope, joy, recognition of gifts, anything that's good that happens in the process as you work along, that you celebrate that, tell stories about good things that have happened, all of that draw people in to what you're doing, draw people out of themselves, introducing people to people with disabilities and helping them see the gifts and the strengths in there. All of that, I think, is around a strategy of working from being able to see glasses as half full rather than half empty on the side of both people with disabilities and other people in the congregation who don't see themselves as disabled, or the white, more typical folks in the congregation. So the Jericho strategy is my way of trying to name that. Then a fish and loaves approach to needs. Um, you know the story, the feeding of the 5,000. They've come into the country with Jesus to hear him speak. And then it comes towards evening, and the disciples start saying, where are we going to send them? Because they need to be fed, and we cannot provide for them. Where are we going to send them? So the disciples are doing classically what we do in our systems and services of support. The first question they ask Jesus is, where can we refer these people? Where people have needs, where are we going to refer them? Where are we going to refer them? To whom should we refer them? And Jesus responds, of course, no, you do it. We're going to do it. You do it. And then their second request of Jesus is, if you give us some money, we can go into the village and buy the food and come and bring it, and we can then provide for the people. I mean, that can translate into, if we get a grant, then we can do this. If somebody else will give us the funding, we can do this. But then in that story, of course, here comes a boy saying, this is what I've got, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. You can have this. And in the miracle of that story, those are taken, those are broken and blessed, and there ends up being enough for everyone. Now, I'm not going to make a rational explanation for that story at all either. I'm not, um, but I wonder sometimes if I wanted to be totally sort of more rational about that, I would say, well, I wonder if everybody was protecting some kind of bag lunch that they brought underneath their robes, or food but were not inclined to share it with anybody else because they didn't want to go first and they were wanting to keep something for themselves. And seeing this act of faith by this small boy just get started, what Jesus did with that, then in fact had brought led to everybody then contributing what they have and what they had, kind of a stone soup kind of miracle that happens in the Bible. And whatever it is, I think it's our capacity to see abundance in a community, in a congregation, rather than um, to look at the scarcity. We don't have enough volunteers. Maybe we don't have funds, but we've how do we start? How do we begin? You begin then small. You begin with hope, with vision, using the gifts of people that the people that you have. Start by telling the stories and hoping for and believing in that there's abundance in the community rather than it being a community of people who don't care or who are people who are indifferent or people who are afraid. Part of that capacity vision comes out of the asset-based community development people who, John McKnight and others, who said so much of community development happens with people coming in and studying the community and saying, here are all the deficits, here are all the things we're going to do to fix those deficits. And nobody ever involves the people themselves. And by starting and saying what's already going on in this community and how can we build upon that rather than assume that we can fix it from the outside by doing in this community the ways people have maybe done it elsewhere. So seeing abundance and possibility rather than scarcity, I think, is again one of those strategies. Uh, Eighth would for me is believing in the call. Uh, if we are leaders in this and feel compelled into this area, think about what called you, touched you, got you involved to the sense that this is something that I feel called to do. Tell those stories about personal learning and revelation and what that, tell those stories. I'm Baptist in background, give witness to those stories. And then believe that by your helping people with disabilities and their families tell their stories and their faith journeys and their hopes about faith, that other people are going to feel called as well, or at least want to learn more, may get curious rather than afraid, and begin to say, oh, maybe this is something I can do, and maybe I can respond. And if people then who are involved in this, and I'm reluctant to call people who are doing this volunteers. The priesthood of all believers is kind of an important concept for me, so that in faith communities, I think in Christian communities, how are we all involved in some kind of ministry or discipleship? And how do we people feel called, and then how to support it in that call um, for what they are moving, if as they are moving into what may be a new and a strange land for them, um, and to believe that, and to work with them and to believe that they'll be on a journey, that they'll have companionship and people to guide, but it's also going to be as much a spiritual journey as it is an educational one, so to speak. And if people who are involved in your programs, make sure you take time to reflect spiritually and theologically about what you're learning as you go along. Um, where are there opportunities to tell the stories of what Johnny did last week that really touched you deeply? Or where this is what I heard from this family. I need to process that with our group. How can we think about that in terms of our faith? Um, so both the successes and the needs and the issues, what, how are we being asked to change as we respond to people in a sense of mission and ministry? Uh, I think people need, I think volunteers get burned out by work and energy um, without times to reflect and work more on the meaning of what they're doing. Uh, it also means helping to support one another in ways so you don't ask any one person to do too much. And burnout can happen in lots of ways, but a lot of times what burnout comes from is not having the chance to renew the kind of values and the spirit and your sense of call that enables you to continue to work and look forward to new opportunities and what you're learning and the challenges involved. Pastors can do that in sermons and others, but you know what? Believe in the call and believe that people, uh, sorry about that, believe that people um, we all need times to reflect on that. And I've got stories with me that I've used over and over again for my own to keep me kind of going again and I turn back to. And stories I hear from other people. It's more so the stories about their experiences and what they learned than it is about any strategy or technique that they might have used. So believing in the call and working with the call. It's not Little Prince is not a biblical story, but this the critical line in that is what is most critical is invisible to the eye is I think very biblical. What's most important is what is our relationships, friendships, connection, belonging. Uh, what's uh, the kind of relationships, the kind of connections that get made in our various forms of inclusive ministry. Uh, People can come to learn, they can come to worship, uh, they can come because they like the coffee hour. I had uh, one time in Rochester, I had some people say to me, Bill, um, we've taken some of our people at our group home to church, and they really seem to like the thing they like to see most about the church is the coffee hour. And I sort of made a comment on that by reversing that and said, well, for a lot of people, the coffee hour is the most important thing. That's when they get to chance to connect with others, their friends, talk with one another. Um, so it's those kinds of I want to go because I've got friends there. I want to go because somebody knows me. I want to know because there I feel loved by God and by others. Um, that's what's most critical is invisible to the eye. And then 10th would be to be watch out for the idolatry of ideology as you work on inclusive work and ministries. I think both in secular disability services and sometimes in faith services, we can have particular beliefs or values that can be so strongly held that they become not just a belief, but a dogma or a doctrine. And then everybody has to do it that particular way, uh, rather than uh, uh, rather than working and being able to work in approximations towards getting there. Some of those examples, for instance, we used to hear a lot about if you can't understand what communion is, you shouldn't participate. Well, that's would be a dogmatic doctrinal approach that kept many people away from the communion table. Some people think somebody's got to be perfectly behaved in order to participate in a faith community. Well, not we just shouldn't put that burden on a person with some kind of intellectual or behavioral disability because we don't put that on all of our kids. We want them to be other people. We may want them to be perfectly behaved, but that's not going to be the case. Things happen, people learn how to deal with it. Do you have to demonstrate that we have faith in a particular way? Or how can we help an individual to show what faith means to them and the importance of it to them in a variety of ways? Does inclusion have to happen in a particular way? Is a separate program or separated thing always bad? It may not be ideal, but it may not be always bad. And if your goal is working towards inclusion as much as possible, and then working with what you have and the people you have, uh, then and making sure there's people have a chance to connect with lots of other people, just be really careful about the ideology of about making a belief such an idol that there's no room for compromise or for bending or working with real people rather than an ideal, in a way. And often, sometimes people would say, well, if their faith was strong enough, somebody could just get their act together. Maybe they wouldn't have that depression and those kinds of things. Those kinds of idolatries about certain kinds of belief can really get in the way of what we're trying to do. So, and it involves don't not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Uh, that a step in a right direction, a step towards care, a step towards moving, a step towards getting to know somebody, a step towards finding ways for them to be involved. Those are all. They may not get there all at once, but they're all steps in the right direction. And you don't and we've got to count also on the creativity of both people and the spirit, so that there's things are not necessarily done in one way. And then finally, uh, the one I've the last few years is even more find ways for everybody to serve and contribute. uh, I think the most important inclusive strategy that I've heard of from people or seen is that people, when they see a person with a disability doing something in the congregation because they want to help out as well, or whatever that is, changes people's mindset. That they're no longer consumers, they're now givers. They're trying to help out, they're trying to do something. They're taking joy and pleasure in doing that. People could see the smile and the importance of that to them. Um, I can't get my phone to turn off. Um, and and if we say we in the world of inclusive ministries have said in the last few years, everybody's got gifts, and we all believe that, and we want to name people's gifts and see them. And we're challenged then by John O'Brien and others to say, well, if they've got a gift, then where there's got to be some place where it can be used. Are we going to turn away a gift of somebody's smile or somebody's caring or somebody's willing to stack chairs or wash dishes or fold the bulletin or greet people or do different kinds of things? We can find places for that to be shared and utilized for the sake of the community. And Brian Brock really said it uh, clearly in his book on Wondrously Wounded. He was in a chapter on the Corinthians passage on everybody having gifts and the lesser parts of the body having gifts that the whole body needs. He said it in a line that just really stuck to me. It says, well, for somebody to really know they have a gift, I can tell them they have a gift. But if for them to really know it, that gift has got to be used and received. I've got to be willing to receive that. I've got to be willing to say, I am thankful, I'm blessed, and other people are blessed. We're blessed by what you're doing and what you're giving for us. So those are kind of my 11 strategies, and I'd be glad to take any questions. Sorry, I've gone longer than I thought I would, but that's always a danger with me.
Okay, I think Rebecca has a question or two there.
Okay.
Well, I had a question of my own. I was wondering, are all of these sort of approaches or planning um, strategies, would you say they're equal, or should there be like a prioritization of some, or does it depend on it's up to the individual community or the leadership?
I'm very hesitant to say one's more important than another, partly because I think we have this huge tendency in science and education and in our modern world to say, here are a number of things that work. And here, if you do them in these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, you make a technology out of it rather than a relationship. It's an art. I think including people, helping inclusive ministries to grow is full of art and full of grace and people doing changing things at different times, being creative. So if you I would be really reluctant to say which one of those I thought was more important, or do them. And I don't think you can do them in this order. You can't do one of those without doing the others in some ways. So it becomes kind of a mindset, I think, of people, of what we learn and can reflect upon as we go along. And again, I can't speak too much to the importance of having those times for reflection for people.
Okay. So it's flexible and customizable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please. I mean, people took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and loss and tried to turn that into a strategy, a technique, and that just people don't go in straight lines, and congregations don't go in straight lines, committees don't go in straight lines, our programs don't go in straight lines. They go kind of wherever. Uh, my favorite poster from college is "Life is what happens when you're making other plans." So you be.
Right. So this is kind of an overarching guide, but it's open to.
Yeah, and there are lots of people out there doing good stuff on the specifics. I mean, there are people online with ministries, welcoming groups, other kinds of places have got lots of things now online where there people can learn specific skills. Rather than ordering something from a printing house, lots of things are online these days in terms of curricula and strategy lessons to use, fun things to do, exercises. So it's all of that, lots of that kind of stuff out there. We got lots of tools to use. I think it's the spirit of what we do is kind of is going to be the key thing, and keeping that spirit up.
There's one kind of I guess, a principle that a lot of our Jewish speakers talk about, which in Hebrew it's called B'Tselem Elohim, and seeing people in the divine image. And I just had maybe if you could share, like, what's a Christian principle that, you would use with these approaches, or something that has been effective, I guess.
Well, that would be the biblical thing could have been the second one. Be careful what language you use. People are created in the image of God. The people are seeing that in that kind of value, and that's the kind of, how do we use the value laden words out of the Bible about people uh, rather than other kinds of words. Whether they're created in the image of God, they are our neighbor or the stranger who is in fact going to bring to us the Spirit of God comes through the stranger, rather than being Gentiles or other kinds. I think the phrase in the biblical word Christ, there is no east or west, or all these different labels, but we're all one. Being all one doesn't mean we're all the same. It means those differences don't matter. I think it's uh, there, and it could, because in that community, whether it be a Jewish uh, synagogue and community that welcomes everybody that are part of its extended community, or a Christian one, then yeah, that's um, you welcome the stranger. You're welcoming. You feed the hungry. You're feeding Jesus in the Christian terms. You go to visit the person in prison.
So usually those kind of principles, I don't think people would oppose those kind of principles or disagree with them, right?
And sometimes it boils down just to the simplicity of those principles. To say, I'm doing this because I think, I believe that everybody belongs. Everybody's created in the image of God. I don't want to be a part of a community that shuts the doors on somebody. What's that a thing, the meme you see on Facebook these days? I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude.
That's a great one.
So again, people. And there's a great book coming out. I hope next year by a guy J.D. Kim, stories about ministries around the country and Canada as well. That's people telling stories about their development of their ministries. And the beautiful thing about it is these stories all get down to those basic core principles. And so in some ways, the complexity of doing all this gets down to the really simple core things at the heart of it, which is about we all belong. There's no such thing as a lesser part of the body. There's, all those kinds of core principles that I think are at the heart of what we're doing.
Well, I feel like there's probably more that we could discuss, but there is a kind of a personal question for you in the chat, but I think I'm going to direct that person to email you directly. Unless you want to answer briefly, but I'm not sure that that's related to our topic.
Is this a curious question about what my third culture experience been? Yes, indeed. I would say that. I could do a long talk about that, but I'm not going to do it now. But feel free to email me and Tom, and email me too if you want the PowerPoints, if you want the slides, or Tom, get them from Tom.
Okay. And I can share your email with everybody as well as and they can get that PowerPoint from you.
And if you've got other core things, strategies, principles that you use, I'd love to hear them. What did I miss? What's core for you all?
I think you did a really good job of covering that. We can also share experiences, and that's how we learn and develop our own approach to disability inclusion in faith communities.
Tell those stories that motivate you. I think sometimes we don't tell the stories because we think that's just us. Maybe it's just me. But what's just me may be just everybody. Tell those stories. And because I think all of us know that stories motivate people a whole lot more than a 10-step lesson plan.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right there, Bill. And feel free to share those with Bill and share those with one another. I want to thank everybody for attending. And Bill, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And for many people that are just thinking about starting a disability ministry, this really gives you a lot to think about and some strategies to use and to set it up so that it is successful and our efforts are meaningful to the people that we are in ministry with. So thank you for sharing that with us, Bill.
And thank you for people who came, for honoring me by coming.
Okay, and we recorded this, so I will send the recording out to everybody who registered. Feel free to share that with anybody that you'd like as well. So before we sign off, I just want to mention that we'll have a Forming Your Inclusion Team webinar next Monday. And we'll have representatives from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths talking about who they include on their team and what is the role of an inclusion team on a faith community. And then on Thursday of next week, Kristen Langford from With Ministries will be talking with us about how to start a disability ministry and get into more of the practical aspects. So we look forward to that. And again, I think that'll be helpful to many of us that are that have our boots on the ground and are actively either thinking of or actively working in a disability ministry. So again, thank you, Bill. And until next week, we hope everything goes well. May God bless you all.